The Galactic Council chamber was silent, the kind of silence that weighed heavy and thick, as though the air itself was trying to crush the room. Every representative present, an assembly of beings from countless star systems, focused on the holographic display suspended in the center. It flickered with the image of a planet, Earth. Once a vibrant, teeming world, it now pulsed with a strange, foreboding energy that no one could explain. The chief counselor, an imposing figure with crystalline scales shimmering in the dim light, cleared his throat. "This anomaly cannot be ignored any longer," he said, his voice measured but tight with unease. "Humanity's absence has left a void, and yet their world," he gestured to the display, "refuses to fade. Reports indicate it is changing." Murmurs rippled through the chamber, tentacles switching, feathers ruffling, and bioluminescent patterns flickering nervously across various alien bodies. Humanity had vanished 5 centuries ago without a trace. One moment, they were there, bold, unpredictable, and infamous for their unrelenting resilience. And the next, they were gone. No warnings, no clues, just silence. Many had considered it a relief. After all, humans were a force that defied galactic norms, their very existence an enigma. But now, Earth itself was acting wrong. "Chief Counselor," interjected a smaller, insectoid being with multifaceted eyes glinting sharply, "our probes have failed to return from the planet's surface. The energy readings are unlike anything we've encountered before. What if this is some dormant weapon? A trap left behind by the humans?" The chief counselor's gaze darkened. "That is precisely why we must act. If humanity has left behind a device capable of retaliatory measures, we cannot risk its activation." Meanwhile, far from the sterile confines of the council chamber, Earth loomed like a silent sentinel, bathed in the soft glow of its sun. But it wasn't the Earth they remembered. The once blue and green jewel of the galaxy now radiated an eerie, shifting aurora, colors spiraling and twisting unnaturally across its atmosphere. Orbiting drones captured fleeting glimpses of landscapes transforming, oceans surging with impossible energy, and mountain ranges that seemed to grow and retract as though alive. On the fringes of the Council's influence, a young technician stationed at a remote observation outpost stared at his screen, eyes wide with disbelief. He wasn't supposed to have access to the restricted feed, but curiosity had gotten the better of him. Now he wished he hadn't looked. The live feed showed something extraordinary, massive tendrils of light snaking up from Earth's surface, reaching out as if searching. They writhed and pulsed, then suddenly froze, pointing directly at the drone camera. The screen went black. A shrill alarm jolted him back to reality, and he scrambled to shut down the feed before his superiors discovered his unauthorized access. But the image of those tendrils was burned into his mind. Whatever was happening on Earth, it wasn't natural. Back in the council chamber, debates grew heated. "We should destroy the planet now," an armored delegate growled, slamming a metallic appendage onto the table. "Humanity is gone. Whatever this is, it poses a threat to us all." "No," countered a soft-spoken, plant-like entity, its voice rustling like leaves in the wind. "Destruction should be our last resort. Humanity may have been volatile, but they were also creators. Think of the knowledge they left behind." A third voice chimed in, deep and resonant, belonging to a whale-like being suspended in a tank of water. "And what if their creations now possess a mind of their own? Machines turned against their makers. We cannot afford to underestimate this." As the arguments raged, the chief counselor raised a clawed hand, silencing the room. "We will send an expedition," he declared. "A carefully selected team. They will determine whether Earth is salvageable or if it must be neutralized." The Council's decision set the galaxy on edge. Volunteers for the mission were few and far between. Stories about Earth's strange transformation had already spread like wildfire, and few were willing to risk their lives venturing into what many now called the dead world. Eventually, a team was assembled. Seasoned explorers, scientists, and soldiers from various species. Each had their reasons for accepting the mission. Some sought glory, others redemption, and a few simply had nothing left to lose. As their ship approached Earth, the crew grew uneasy. The planet's haunting glow filled their viewports, and an unnatural hum vibrated through the ship's systems. Instruments malfunctioned without explanation, and cryptic messages appeared on their monitors, symbols resembling ancient human languages, though none could decipher them. When they finally breached the atmosphere, the team was struck by the surreal beauty of Earth's surface. Towering forests shimmered with leaves made of light, rivers glowed with a molten silver hue, and the sky shifted colors with every passing second. It was as if the planet itself had become a living, breathing entity. But the awe quickly turned to dread. Scattered across the landscape were the remnants of human civilization, skeletal skyscrapers covered in alien vines, highways cracked and overgrown, and machines frozen mid-motion, as if humanity had vanished in an instant. As the team ventured deeper, they found something even more unsettling. A massive structure at the planet's core, pulsating with energy. It seemed alive, yet mechanical, its surface covered in symbols that glowed faintly. When one of the explorers reached out to touch it, the structure reacted violently, sending a shockwave that knocked everyone to the ground. The team's leader activated their comms, voice shaking. "Mission Control, we found something, but it's not human." Before they could say more, the structure emitted a deep, resonant hum that seemed to penetrate their very beings. The air around them shimmered, and suddenly, holographic images began to appear. Scenes of humanity's history played out before their eyes. Wars, triumphs, discoveries, and finally, their mysterious disappearance. One image lingered longer than the rest. A human figure standing before a massive, glowing device, their expression one of grim determination. The figure's final words echoed through the air, chilling the team to their core. "If you are watching this, then you have tampered with what was never yours to claim. Leave now, or face the wrath of a world that remembers." The structure pulsed again, and the ground beneath them began to quake. The team scrambled to their feet, panic setting in as the realization dawned. Earth wasn't just alive, it was angry. As they retreated to their ship, the landscape around them shifted, closing off paths and forcing them into a desperate race against time. The planet seemed determined to keep them there, its wrath growing with every passing moment. Back in orbit, the Council's observers watched in horror as Earth's glow intensified, tendrils of energy reaching into space and ensnaring the expedition's ship. The crew's last transmission was a garbled mix of screams and static before the feed cut out entirely. The council chamber was silent once more, but this time the silence was laced with fear. For centuries, they had underestimated humanity. Now, it seemed, Earth itself was ready to remind them why that had been a mistake. The Galactic Council remained paralyzed, their collective gaze fixed on the blank screen where the expedition's transmission had disappeared. The chief counselor's crystalline face betrayed no emotion, but his claws tapped an unsteady rhythm on the table. The silence stretched unbearably, punctuated only by the faint hum of the chamber's life support systems. No one dared speak. They all knew the implications. Earth was not dormant. Whatever was left of humanity, or what humanity had created, had evolved far beyond their comprehension. In a shadowed alcove of the chamber, an older alien with fur streaked in silver leaned closer to his subordinate. His voice was a low whisper, but it carried the weight of experience. "I warned them," he said bitterly. "We should have left Earth untouched. Humans never played by the rules. Why should their planet?" His subordinate, a younger, nervous creature with wide, shimmering eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "But they're gone," she whispered back, almost pleading. "They vanished. How could they leave something behind that? Alive?" The elder didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was clear. Humans had always defied expectations. They weren't the strongest species or the most advanced, but they were relentless, unpredictable, and most disturbingly, adaptive. The galaxy had breathed a collective sigh of relief when they disappeared. Now, that relief felt like a cruel joke. Far from the Council's chambers, on the bustling trade planet of Idris 7, the news of Earth's resurgence spread like wildfire. Merchants paused their transactions to gawk at holoscreens, displaying shaky footage of Earth's glowing tendrils reaching into space. Pilots in crowded starports exchanged worried glances, and even the normally rowdy taverns grew quiet as patrons leaned in to listen to the latest rumors. "Did you hear?" A reptilian trader hissed to her companion, her scales flickering nervously. "Earth's alive. It's hunting." "Hunting?" Her companion echoed, incredulous. The trader nodded, lowering her voice. "A whole expedition team gone, and those energy readings, unlike anything the Council's seen. Whatever the humans left behind, it's not friendly." At a nearby table, a lone figure in a worn, hooded cloak listened intently. Beneath the hood, their face was obscured, but their posture stiffened at the mention of Earth. They drained their drink and left without a word, leaving behind a few strange, glinting coins that no one recognized. Meanwhile, on the edges of known space, a small, unregistered ship drifted in the void. Its crew, a ragtag mix of smugglers, mercenaries, and wanderers, gathered in the dimly lit common room, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of a makeshift holoscreen. The footage of Earth's glowing tendrils played on a loop, and the air was thick with tension. "You think it's worth it?" one of them asked, a scared and weathered figure leaning against the wall. The captain, a wiry, sharp-eyed alien with an air of quiet authority, didn't answer immediately. He stared at the screen, his jaw set in a grim line. Finally, he said, "Worth what? Getting killed? No. But the Council's desperate. Desperation pays well." The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They all knew the captain's words carried a double meaning. Desperation might pay well, but it also got people killed. In the days that followed, the Council's fear turned into frantic activity. They sent out calls for specialists, scientists, strategists, anyone with experience dealing with anomalies. Rewards were promised, fortunes offered, and reputations dangled as bait. Slowly, volunteers began to trickle in, though most were motivated by greed rather than courage. Among them was a human, one of the few left scattered across the galaxy. He had lived quietly for years, blending into alien societies, trying to forget the ghosts of his past. But when he saw the footage of Earth, something stirred inside him, a mixture of dread and hope. He approached the Council discreetly, his face shadowed by a hood. "You'll need me," he said simply. The chief counselor studied him carefully, suspicion etched across his crystalline features. "You assume we can trust you, human?" The man smirked faintly. "Trust me or don't. Either way, you won't understand Earth without someone who knows what it was, what we were." Reluctantly, the Council agreed. They added him to the next expedition, though they kept him under heavy surveillance. The new team was larger, more prepared, and better equipped than the first. They carried advanced scanners, reinforced suits, and weapons designed to counter the unknown. As their ship approached Earth, they marveled at the planet's unnatural beauty, the shimmering atmosphere, the glowing rivers, the shifting landscapes. It was mesmerizing. But the human stayed silent, his jaw tight as he stared out the viewport. To him, Earth didn't look beautiful. It looked angry. The team's landing went smoother than expected, though the atmosphere buzzed with an energy that made their skin crawl. They set up a perimeter and began their work, scanning the terrain, analyzing samples, and documenting the strange phenomena. The human wandered away from the group, drawn by a sense of familiarity he couldn't explain. He stopped at the edge of a ruined city, its skeletal buildings draped in glowing vines. As he stepped closer, the air around him seemed to hum, and he felt a pull, like a faint echo of something calling him home. In the distance, the rest of the team was busy setting up equipment when one of the scientists noticed something odd. The readings on her scanner fluctuated wildly, the numbers jumping erratically. "That's not right," she muttered, tapping the device. Before she could investigate further, the ground beneath them rumbled. A low, resonant sound filled the air, and the glowing tendrils began to emerge, snaking toward them with deliberate intent. Panic erupted. The team scrambled to retreat, shouting over their comms, but the tendrils moved faster. They encircled the group, cutting off escape routes, and the air grew thick with a strange, oppressive energy. The human heard the commotion and turned back, his heart pounding. He sprinted toward the team, dodging debris and leaping over fissures that seemed to open up just to stop him. When he reached them, he froze. The tendrils weren't attacking. They were scanning. One by one, they hovered over each team member, emitting a strange rhythmic pulse. It was as if they were searching for something or someone. When a tendril approached the human, it hesitated. The pulsing stopped, and for a moment, the air was completely still. Then the tendril withdrew, and the others followed suit, retreating into the ground as quickly as they had appeared. The silence that followed was deafening. The team stared at the human, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. "What did you do?" one of them demanded. He shook his head, his expression unreadable. "I didn't do anything," he said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that Earth had recognized him, and that it was waiting. The air around the team felt heavier now, as if the planet itself was watching. The human stood at the center of the group, his breath unsteady. He didn't know what had just happened, but he could feel the shift, like a storm building on the horizon. The others kept their distance, their unease palpable. No one spoke as they packed their equipment, moving quickly to retreat to the ship. The glowing tendrils had vanished, but the ground still pulsed faintly under their feet, a reminder of the strange encounter. As they trekked back to the landing site, the human found his gaze drawn to the ruins around them. Cities long abandoned now shimmered with an unnatural life, their skeletal remains intertwined with glowing vines that seemed to pulse in rhythm with the faint hum in the air. He couldn't shake the feeling that these ruins weren't entirely dead. They felt aware, as if the structures themselves were part of something larger, something alive. The rest of the team, still shaken, kept their conversations terse and quiet. One of the scientists murmured to a colleague, "The readings don't make sense. It's almost like the planet knew we were here." Another added, "And those tendrils, they weren't random. They had intent, like they were searching." The human stayed silent, his thoughts racing. The tendrils hadn't attacked him. If anything, they had seemed to recognize him. But why? He wasn't special. He was just one of the few humans left, and he hadn't set foot on Earth since his childhood. Yet something deep within him stirred, a faint echo of familiarity that he couldn't explain. When they reached the ship, the team hurried aboard, relief washing over them as the hatch sealed shut. But the human hesitated on the ramp, his eyes scanning the landscape one last time. The ruins loomed in the distance, their glow faint but persistent, like embers waiting to ignite. He felt a pull, a strange, unexplainable urge to stay. "Let's go," one of the crew called from inside, breaking his trance. He nodded and stepped aboard, but the feeling lingered, gnawing at the edge of his mind. The journey back to the orbiting station was tense. The team reviewed their data, poring over the strange readings and replaying the footage of the tendrils. The numbers defied logic, and every analysis only deepened the mystery. The human sat apart from the group, staring out the viewport at the shrinking planet below. The chief counselor was waiting for them when they docked. His crystalline form shimmered under the station's artificial lights, his expression unreadable. He listened intently as the team recounted their experience, his claws tapping a steady rhythm on the table. When they finished, he turned his piercing gaze to the human. "And you," he said, his voice cold. "The tendrils stopped for you. Explain." The human frowned, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "I don't know," he said, his voice firm. "I don't have answers. All I know is that Earth isn't the same planet we left behind." The counselor leaned forward, his crystalline face glinting. "You're withholding something. The planet responded to you. Why?" "I don't know." The human snapped, his fists clenching. "I haven't been there in decades. Whatever Earth is now, it's not because of me." The tension in the room was thick, the counselor's glare unyielding. Finally, he leaned back, his claws resuming their rhythmic tapping. "We'll see," he said coolly. "You're not leaving this station until we understand what's happening." The human's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew they wouldn't believe him, and truthfully, he wasn't sure he believed himself. As the council deliberated their next move, the human couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The station's sterile halls felt suffocating, and every shadow seemed to hold a trace of Earth's presence. He wasn't the only one who noticed. Strange malfunctions began to plague the station. Lights flickering, doors refusing to open, systems going offline without explanation. At first, the Council dismissed the incidents as mere technical glitches, but as they grew more frequent and more deliberate, panic began to set in. It was as if Earth's influence had reached beyond its atmosphere, extending its grasp to the station itself. The human found himself drawn to the observation deck, staring out at the distant blue-green orb. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like the planet was calling to him, demanding something. The feeling was both terrifying and intoxicating. Late one night, as the station's corridors lay silent, he slipped away from his quarters. He needed answers, and he knew the only way to find them was to return to Earth. But as he reached the docking bay, he found someone waiting for him, a young alien from the team, her wide eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "You're going back, aren't you?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then nodded. "I have to. There's something down there, something only I can figure out." She glanced around nervously, then stepped closer. "Take me with you. I can help." He frowned, shaking his head. "It's too dangerous." "So was the first mission," she countered. "But I survived that. Besides, if Earth really is alive, you're going to need someone who can understand it." He studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine, but we leave now." Together, they boarded a small, unregistered craft and launched into the void. As the station faded into the distance, the human couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He didn't know if they'd be coming back. As they descended through Earth's shimmering atmosphere, the planet seemed to pulse with life, its glowing tendrils reaching toward them like a beacon. The human gripped the controls tightly, his heart pounding. "This is it," he murmured. "Whatever's waiting for us, we'll find it here." The craft touched down in the middle of a glowing forest, its trees alive with a strange, ethereal light. The air was thick with energy, every breath electric. As they stepped out, the ground beneath them hummed softly, as if welcoming them or warning them. The human glanced at his companion, her expression mirroring his unease. "Stay close," he said, his voice low. But as they ventured deeper into the forest, the tendrils began to emerge once more, their glowing forms weaving through the trees. This time, they didn't stop at a distance. They moved closer, their pulsing light growing stronger, surrounding the pair in an intricate, shifting web. The human felt his chest tighten, his instincts screaming to run, but he didn't move. Something told him this was a test, a moment of reckoning. The tendrils paused, their light intensifying, and the hum in the air grew deafening. Then, without warning, a deep, resonant voice echoed through the forest, not spoken but felt, reverberating through their very bones. "Why have you returned?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. The human swallowed hard, his mind racing. He didn't know how to answer, or if any answer would be enough. The human froze, the weight of the question pressing down on him. The voice felt ancient, like it carried the wisdom and pain of countless eons. He couldn't tell if it was coming from the tendrils, the trees, or the planet itself, but it was clear it wasn't just in his mind. His companion heard it too. She looked at him with wide eyes, waiting for him to respond. "I don't know why I'm here," he said finally, his voice trembling but honest. "But I couldn't stay away. There's something about this place, about you, that won't let me go." The tendrils shifted, their glow dimming slightly, as if they were contemplating his answer. The hum in the air softened, but the tension didn't ease. His companion stepped forward, her voice steady despite her fear. "We didn't come to harm you," she said. "We came because we need to understand. The Council, they don't know what you've become. They're afraid of you, but we want to help, if we can." For a long moment, there was silence. Then the voice returned, colder this time, like a knife slicing through the air. "You misunderstand. We do not need help. It is you who are in danger." The ground beneath their feet trembled, and the tendrils began to weave together, forming a shape, a figure. It was humanoid, but impossibly tall, its glowing form crackling with energy. The human and his companion instinctively stepped back, their hearts pounding. "What kind of danger?" the human asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The figure's eyes, if they could be called that, locked onto him, and the weight of its gaze was almost unbearable. "The Council's fear is not misplaced," it said. "They seek to destroy what they cannot control, but their weapons are not the greatest threat." The human frowned, trying to make sense of the cryptic words. "Then what is?" The figure leaned closer, its form flickering like a dying flame. "The darkness you brought with you. It has followed you here, and it will consume everything if you do not act." His companion's breath hitched. "The darkness? What does that mean?" But the figure didn't answer. Instead, it began to dissolve, its glowing form unraveling into countless tendrils that drifted back into the trees. The ground stopped trembling, and the hum in the air faded, leaving an eerie silence. The human turned to his companion, his mind racing. "What darkness? Do you think it means the Council? Or something else?" She shook her head, her expression troubled. "I don't know. But if it's true, if something followed us here, we need to figure out what it is before it's too late." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden burst of static from the communicator on her wrist. A garbled voice came through, barely intelligible. "Emergency. Station compromised. Return immediately." Her eyes widened as she adjusted the frequency, trying to clear the signal. "This is Team Alpha. Repeat your message." The static crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer, filled with panic. "The station under attack. Systems failing. Something's inside." The human's blood ran cold. Inside? What's inside? Before they could get a response, the signal cut out, leaving only silence. They exchanged a look, their fear mirrored in each other's eyes. "We have to go back," his companion said urgently. "If something's attacking the station, we need to warn them about what the figure said." But the human hesitated, his gaze drifting back to the glowing forest. "What if this darkness is already here? What if leaving means we bring it back to the station with us?" She opened her mouth to respond, but a sudden rustling in the trees cut her off. They spun around, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. The forest had grown darker, the glowing light dimming as shadows crept closer. "We're not alone," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. The human scanned the tree line, his heart racing. At first, he saw nothing, but then the shadows began to shift, coalescing into shapes. Dozens of figures emerged, their forms dark and indistinct, like living silhouettes. They moved with an unnatural grace, their glowing eyes fixed on the pair. "Run," the human said, his voice firm. They bolted through the forest, the glowing trees blurring past them as the shadowy figures gave chase. The air grew colder with each step, and the hum from before returned, louder and more chaotic. It felt as if the planet itself was reacting, its pulse quickening like a panicked heartbeat. The human glanced over his shoulder and saw the figures gaining on them, their movements eerily synchronized. He pushed himself harder, his legs burning with effort. "There!" his companion shouted, pointing ahead. Through the trees, he saw the faint outline of their craft. Relief surged through him, but it was short-lived. The ground beneath their feet began to crack, glowing fissures spreading like veins. The tendrils from earlier erupted from the earth, writhing violently, as if trying to block their path. "We're not going to make it," she cried, her voice desperate. "Yes, we will," he shouted back, grabbing her arm and pulling her forward. As they neared the craft, the shadowy figures closed in, their glowing eyes burning with malice. The human reached the ramp first, practically shoving his companion inside before turning to face the oncoming swarm. The tendrils lashed out, tangling with the shadows in a chaotic dance of light and dark. The human didn't wait to see who would win. He slammed the hatch shut and sprinted to the controls, his companion already working to power up the engines. As the craft lifted off, the shadowy figures swarmed the exterior, their forms clinging to the hull. The human fired the thrusters, the force shaking them loose, but he could still see them through the viewport, their glowing eyes fixed on him as the craft ascended. "What the hell were those things?" his companion asked, her voice trembling. I don't know, he said, his hands gripping the controls tightly. But I think that's the darkness the figure warned us about. She swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on the shrinking forest below. If it followed us here, it's not going to stop. The human nodded grimly, his mind racing. They had escaped for now, but he knew this was far from over. The shadowy figures weren't just a threat to Earth, they were a threat to everyone. And if the Council had no idea what was coming, they wouldn't stand a chance. The human's heart pounded in his chest as he and his companion navigated the craft through the void of space, the shadowy figures now mere specks against the backdrop of stars. But he knew it wasn't over, not yet. The darkness, whatever it was, had followed them. It was just waiting for the right moment to strike. His fingers flew over the controls, adjusting course, locking in coordinates, but every movement felt like it could be their last. The silence in the cockpit was deafening. His companion sat tense beside him, her eyes glued to the monitor, scanning for any signs of pursuit. They both knew the truth now. Whatever those shadowy creatures were, they weren't just mindless attackers. They were connected to the planet, perhaps even to the very fabric of the universe itself. "We're almost there," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, keeping his focus. They had to get back to Earth to warn the Council. But even as they approached their destination, he felt an unease settle over him. The fabric of space around them seemed to warp, twisting like the air before a storm. "Something's wrong," he muttered, his gaze darting between the instruments. The readings were unstable, erratic. Before his companion could respond, a blinding light flooded the cockpit, followed by a deafening crash. The entire ship lurched violently, throwing them both from their seats. The monitors exploded with static, the controls flickering in and out. For a moment, everything was chaos. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the ship stabilized, but they weren't where they should be. "We're not in Earth's orbit," his companion said, voice tight with disbelief. "No," he replied, his mind racing. He quickly ran another scan, but the readings were bizarre. They were still in the same galaxy, but it didn't feel like it. It was as if they'd been pulled into another dimension, another layer of reality. A loud thump echoed from somewhere deep within the hull, followed by a growl that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. The human didn't need to look at his companion to know she felt it too. The darkness was here. The creatures that had followed them, those shadowy figures, were no longer on the outside. They were inside the ship. With one swift motion, he grabbed his weapon from the console and dashed toward the sound. His companion was right behind him, her own weapon drawn. They reached the door to the engine room, and before he could open it, a clawed hand shot through the crack. He barely had time to react, but the creature's talon scraped his shoulder. He hissed in pain but fired back, hitting the creature square in the chest. It screeched in agony, retracting back into the shadows. "Let's get to the weapons bay," he shouted, knowing they needed to fortify their position. They couldn't fight something like this in the open. The two of them sprinted through the narrow corridors of the ship, the metallic walls groaning as something heavy slithered beneath them. It was clear they weren't dealing with normal creatures. The air grew colder, and the ship's lights flickered as if something was draining its power. As they reached the weapons bay, the human began to arm themselves with whatever they could find. Lasers, explosive charges, anything that might slow down their relentless pursuers. His companion grabbed a rifle and a small grenade, checking the charges with swift, practiced motions. "We need to find the source," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her eyes. "This ship is still connected to the planet. Whatever that darkness is, it's here now." The human nodded grimly. "We've got one shot. Let's make it count." They moved out together, the weight of the mission pressing down on them. Every sound, every creak, every whisper of air could signal an attack. The tension was unbearable, but there was no turning back. They couldn't let this ship, or whatever was inside it, get to Earth. As they reached the central control room, the air shifted. The temperature plummeted, and the walls began to pulse with an eerie, dark glow. The figures, the shadowy creatures, appeared once more, except now they were different. They weren't just attacking. They were growing. The human's pulse quickened. They're evolving. They're learning. We need to stop them now. Suddenly, the entire room flickered. Time itself seemed to bend, like the fabric of reality was unraveling. A figure appeared before them, not one of the creatures, but the same being that had spoken to them on the planet, the one made of tendrils and light. You still don't understand, do you? The voice rang out, filling the room. You think you can outrun this. You think you can stop it, but you were never meant to. The human's mind raced. What do you mean? Who are you? What's happening to us? The figure shifted, its form warping as it spoke. You are the key to the darkness. You always have been. The Council. They think they control the galaxy, but they've underestimated what lies beyond their reach. The room seemed to pulse around them, the light flickering. The walls, the floor, even the air felt alive, as if the entire ship were merging with something far greater. The human took a step back, realizing that this wasn't just a threat. It was a force that had been building, waiting, preparing. And they were part of it. No, his companion breathed, understanding dawning. We're the ones they've been waiting for. We. Before she could finish, the entire ship jolted, the hull groaning under pressure. The tendrils from earlier burst through the walls, snaking around them like vines. The creatures, the darkness, it was all coming together. The human and his companion were at the center of it, their presence the trigger. And then the twist came. The ship's core, the very heart of their vessel, began to implode, the energy inside it unraveling like the universe itself was breaking apart. But amidst the chaos, the human saw something. It was a flash, a glimpse of light, something outside the ship. A massive force, far more powerful than anything they had encountered. It was Earth. And Earth wasn't coming to save them. Earth was bringing the storm. The darkness they had tried to outrun wasn't from the planet they had left behind. It had always been with them. It had been waiting for the right moment, for the right people to awaken it. As the ship began to collapse, the human and his companion had only one thought left. They weren't fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for everything. The universe would soon know what it meant to awaken Earth's vengeance. The collapse of the ship felt like an eternity. Every second stretched out, the very fabric of space around them warping under the force of Earth's unexpected wrath. The human and his companion, trapped in the heart of this cosmic storm, could barely hold on to their reality as the walls buckled and twisted. A blinding light surged through the ship, and with a deafening crack, the vessel split apart. For a moment, all was darkness. Then, they were free. The human's eyes snapped open, the familiar, cold void of space surrounding them once again. They were drifting, no longer in the ship. The stars, distant and unfeeling, blinked down at them as the remains of their craft floated aimlessly in the wake of the explosion. Their bodies, battered and bruised from the chaos, were suspended in the empty vacuum, but miraculously, they were alive. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Their breaths echoed in their helmets, shallow and ragged. They had been prepared for many things, death, perhaps, or a final confrontation. But this? The silence of space felt like a cruel irony. Did we make it? She asked, her voice trembling inside the comm system. The human slowly turned his gaze toward her, meeting her eyes through their helmets. I think so, but the real question is what happens next. The destruction of their ship was only the beginning. The core they had unleashed, the force from Earth that had torn through the galaxy, shifting the balance of power, had left a mark. Something massive, something far beyond their understanding, was in motion now. It wasn't just Earth's vengeance anymore. It was the wrath of an entire world, rising from centuries of oppression and silence. They had seen it in the eyes of the darkness. It was no longer just a war between two factions, between two races. It was a war for the future itself. The stars above them shimmered like distant candles. The human reached out, his fingers brushing against the shattered remains of the ship's hull as they drifted toward the debris. He didn't know what had become of their message, of the Council, or even of Earth itself. What would happen now that the veil had been lifted? Would the galaxy, so comfortable in its dominance, finally wake up to the true power Earth had been hiding. It had been a long time coming, and the universe had underestimated them. Humanity had endured, survived, and now they were a force no one could ignore. Earth's vengeance, that ancient, untapped power, was their gift and their curse. The galaxy would have to reckon with them. There was no turning back. His companion's voice crackled through the comms, breaking through his thoughts. I can't even begin to process this. What we've set in motion. I don't think anyone's prepared for what's coming. No, the human replied quietly. I don't think they are. As they drifted through space, the human couldn't shake the thought that this was the beginning of something bigger than them. They had been mere players in a much larger game. The darkness that had pursued them was just the first sign of the forces Earth had unleashed. The galaxy would soon realize the cost of underestimating a planet that had survived countless trials, a planet whose people had been pushed to the brink, only to rise again, stronger and more determined than ever. But there was no time for reflection. The ship's destruction, the core of Earth's power, had sent shockwaves through space. The Council, who thought they had control, would feel the ripple. Earth had set a course, one that could not be stopped. The human didn't know how or when, but he knew Earth's power would be felt across the stars. A loud crackling sound pierced through the static. They weren't alone anymore. From the shadows of space, a ship emerged, large, menacing, and unmistakably alien. The sleek black vessel loomed in front of them, its shape shifting in ways that defied understanding. There was no doubt in the human's mind. The Council had found them. They're coming, he muttered. His grip tightened on the controls of the emergency beacon, but he wasn't sure whether it would help them or seal their fate. Earth's retaliation was underway. He had no illusions about what was coming. His companion, eyes wide with fear, reached for the comms. We have to warn them. Warn Earth. They have no idea what we've done. We're too late for that, the human said, shaking his head. Earth's vengeance has already begun. All we can do now is hold on and see what happens next. The alien ship, now much closer, sent out a transmission, distorted, glitchy, but unmistakable in its intent. The voice crackled over their comms, a chilling blend of anger and disbelief. You unleashed the power of Earth. You think we didn't see it coming. The voice hissed, thick with venom. You think you can hide from the Council forever? You will pay for your insolence. The human took a deep breath, steadying himself. He knew this was the moment of reckoning. The Council's time is over, he said, his voice steady, defiant. And so is yours. The alien ship moved closer, weapons locking onto them, but the human remained calm. Earth had already sent its message, whether the Council liked it or not. It had shaken the foundations of the universe. This was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future, for control, for everything that had been taken from Earth. As the alien ship advanced, the human and his companion braced for impact, knowing the odds were stacked against them. They had come this far, endured so much, and now there was no going back. Then, just as the alien ship fired, a sudden flash of light enveloped them. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The human's body was thrown back, his vision blurred. He could hear his companion's voice, faint, lost in the chaos. And then, everything went silent. When he opened his eyes again, he wasn't in space. He wasn't in the ship. Everything had changed. The stars had vanished, replaced by a vast expanse of shimmering, shifting colors. It was as if they had crossed into another reality, one that defied all comprehension. At the center of this new space was Earth, but it was no longer the Earth they had known. This Earth pulsed with unimaginable energy, radiating power that resonated with every fiber of his being. He looked at his companion, who was equally stunned by the transformation. What is this? Where are we? A voice, not of the alien ship, but of something much older, much more powerful, echoed through their minds. This is the true power of Earth. This is what you have unleashed, what you have awakened. The human could feel the weight of it, the enormity of their actions. Earth had become something beyond a planet, beyond a mere world. It had become a force, and the universe, as it had once known it, would never be the same again. The final twist of fate had come. Earth's vengeance was no longer a simple act of retaliation. It was a cosmic rebirth, a new beginning for humanity, a new beginning for the universe. But with that beginning came the understanding that nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. And now, the universe would learn to fear what it had tried to destroy. The human looked toward his companion, knowing their fight had just begun. There was no going back now. The Council, the galaxy, and the stars themselves, none would be spared. Earth had spoken.